Jake's Secret Audition by J.P. O'Brien. Things on Sycamore Street were, at present, rather cheerful. Miss Tiny, who had recently found and decoded a hidden message from Lars, was delighted to find he was capable of expressing his heartfelt feelings after all, and the two of them had hardly left each other's sides since. So much so that Lars had now become a regular fixture in the school library during her working hours. This didn't bother Mr. Burgess, the school's headmaster, who rather liked having Lars around. So too did the kindergartners, whom he let crawl all over him during story time. Ben Radcliffe and Joe Caldwell had been meeting regularly in Joe's rec room to work on material for their sci-fi concept album, and the project seemed to have given each of them a new lease on life. While Imelda Ellsworth, her hair unusually messy and her attire remarkably casual, seemed to be considerably more relaxed of late. Even Clive Rotwood had a spring in his step after finding a fountain pen he thought lost some 20 years earlier. As the fading golden light was thrown against the sides of the houses after a weekend of glorious sunshine, the sound of laughter and a pleasant aroma of grilling meat wafted out of Adrian and Helena's back garden. The couple were throwing a get-together to announce their engagement. Unfortunately, very little was actually being announced. Upon hearing the news, Marigold had practically gone door to door to tell everyone. So Helena, knowing just how much it meant to Adrian, quietly asked the arriving guests to simply pretend they didn't already know. While a babbling baby James was keeping Catherine, Violet and Sandy thoroughly entertained at the patio table, several of the men, along with Helena and a salivating Dapper, crowded around Adrian's grill. Adrian himself was turning over the sausages with a pair of tongs and drawing everyone's attention to the bug zapper he had bought for the occasion. "We were using the candles for a while," he explained. "Those citronella ones, but they don't really do all that much. Plus the smell. It really gets up my nose," added Helena, fanning her fingers towards her face. "But this is a beauty," Ben marvelled at the space-age gadget suspended above their heads. Joe inspected the air around them for pests. "It's certainly doing the job," he said. "Plus less of a fire hazard," pointed out Tom as a gnat exploded in a tiny spark against the blue light. "Well, for the humans, anyway." Dom Burns, who had until now been listening and munching contentedly on his hot dog, started to splutter violently. "It wasn't that funny," teased Joe, before realizing that Dom was actually turning a rather unsettling shade of purple. He began thumping a clenched fist against his neighbour's back while all eyes in the garden turned to them. Dom blindly reached over for his beer to wash the blockage down, but accidentally grabbed the bottle of Diablo Rojo hot sauce sitting beside it instead. He took a great swig of the luminous red fluid, and feeling the intense burn scorch its way down his esophagus, erupted with an ear-piercing scream. Baby James started to wail too, while Dapper's own sympathetic howl lasted until he noticed the guilty chunk of sausage flying through the air to the bottom of the garden. After a few moments, thankfully able to breathe once more, Dom's cheeks softened from dark purple to merely bright pink. But when he opened his mouth to speak, not a single sound came out. A quick inspection by veterinarian Helena revealed that he had managed to both sear his throat and rupture his vocal cords all at the same time, and within minutes Dom found himself sitting alongside a very concerned Sandy in the back of Adrian's Honda on the way to the hospital. A moment or two earlier, Rory Caldwell had been sitting up in his room a few houses away, noodling on his guitar and enjoying, but feeling slightly tormented by, the pleasant scent drifting through his open bedroom window. He had unfortunately had to decline his dad's invitation to come get a burger with the neighbours, telling himself he needed to finish a new song by the time his band's drummer returned from a family holiday. As lead guitarist, sole songwriter, and principal driving force of the as-yet unsigned Discount Sushi, Rory took his responsibilities very seriously. But what with once again working regular after-school shifts at the Reptile Amphibian Emporium and dedicating all his remaining time to his girlfriend Leona, he found there simply weren't enough hours in the day. It had always been inevitable that the younger Rory would one day put together a band of his own, given the terrific good fortune of receiving not only Joe Caldwell's musical genes and relentless fatherly encouragement, but also access to his extensive collection of guitars. At age 14, motivated by whatever it is teenage boys are motivated by, Rory and his childhood friends Alex, Enrico and Peter assigned themselves roles and started calling themselves a rock band. But a couple of years had passed since then, and although the four of them had grown to sound reasonably melodic and by no means lacking potential, Rory couldn't ignore the fact that something wasn't working. He continued to riff with closed eyes, then suddenly heard the most incredible high-pitched scream ringing out in perfect harmony with his playing. He halted to listen. "Huh?" he asked the empty room. But there was only silence. He recalled his dad recently asking him about finding a singer for the band. Rory had dismissed the suggestion at the time, embarrassed in front of his friends that his bored dad was simply trying to involve himself. But on the other hand, maybe that really was the missing link. It was only when talking with Leona at school the following morning that Rory learned what had actually been responsible for the noise he heard. "Oh," Rory said, laughing in some relief. "I thought it was in my head, like I was having some sort of rock and roll epiphany or something." "Nope, just Don Burns chugging hot sauce," explained Leona dryly. Rory stifled a laugh. "Is he okay?" "I think so. Sandy texted my mum when they got home from the hospital last night. Apparently the nurses had never seen anything quite like it. Poor Dom. Guess having such spectacular pipes comes at a price." The two of them arrived outside Leona's first class. Rory squeezed her hand and kissed her forehead. She blushed and swept the hair behind her ear. "I think there's something in the air at the moment," she said. "There seem to be a lot of those going around." "Kisses?" asked Rory, a little confused. She admonished him with a gentle punch on the shoulder. "Epiphanies! It's weird. I keep seeing Antoine out on the street, but no one else ever seems to actually see him." "That fox, you mean?" "Yeah. What if I've just been imagining him all along? Do you think he's real?" "I believe you think he's real." Leona took no notice and stared off into space. "Maybe he's my spirit guide or something. I thought you already had a dapper for that." "I can have 2 spirit guides," she insisted, before reaching up on her tiptoes to kiss Rory on the nose. While Leona's thoughts in her first period maths class drifted happily through the storyline of The Little Prince, the same could not be said of Lorraine Herschey, who had not once opened the book she had been given. Leona's copy, which had so far travelled through 15 states and 6 of Violet's previous relationships, was now doing no more than gathering dust on top of Lorraine's bureau. As she arrived at her office, the beautiful clear skies from the weekend had given way to an oppressive grey mugginess, and the first fat drops of rain were beginning to streak down the windowpane. It reminded Lorraine of being back at school, showing up to class on a miserable Monday morning, having once again failed to complete her homework assignments. This was, in a sense, what her work currently felt like too. After her twin daughters had broken into the old Hannibal house and managed to smash an enormous mirror in its entrance hall, in doing so chasing away the first potential buyers their stressed mother had found in months, Lorraine was now very much back to square one. She had been so preoccupied with getting rid of the place once and for all that she hadn't even had time to properly think of how to punish her girls for the incident. Instead, the 3 of them had simply entered into an odd stalemate, as if nothing had even happened. Lorraine sat in her swivel chair and glanced at the calendar. There was some good news, at least. This Friday would see Guildwood and Hart's annual company-wide meeting in which their coveted Agent of the Year award was given, a prize that Lorraine herself had won an unprecedented 4 consecutive times and counting. There was nothing quite like earning the professional respect of her peers and superiors, and taking a nice golden plaque home to boot, she thought. Like Christmas in summertime. She reclined and exhaled, grateful for the job she loved. By the time Rory met Leona outside her final class that afternoon, the heavy downpours had subsided, though the air remained heavy and humid. The 2 teens formulated a plan. First, collect Dapper from Leona's house, next wander over to Rory's to pick up SC, and then all 4 of them walk Rory over to his shift at the Reptile Amphibian Emporium. As they were leaving the school gates, a barely audible rumble of drums drifted over the car park from the main hall. Over the previous couple of weeks, Jake Burns had been making considerable progress in his own pursuit of rock and roll stardom. Though his campaign to acquire drums of his own was so far proving fruitless, his father would straight away dismiss any mention with a series of unimpressed grunts and growls. He had taken to staying late and making use of the battered drum kit on the empty school stage instead. He found that, with no one around to bother him, he could cue up songs in his earphones and just go wild, performing for the rows of empty seating in his own imagined rock show. Fun though it was, this new favourite pastime of his frequently caused him to lose track of time. He would often rush home, sweaty, hands blistered from clutching the drumsticks, arriving with mere minutes to spare before his stepmum put dinner on the table. She would ask what he had been up to. "Oh, not much," Jake would reply, concealing a smile. "Just playing in front of 50,000 screaming fans." Tonight's dinner, of course, was substantially quieter than normal. Jake's mute father Dom sat grumpily at the head of the table with arms folded, watching Sandy spoon an unappetizing splodge of soft mashed potatoes onto his plate while the rest of the family's steaks steamed appetizingly on theirs. "Oh, don't pout, honey," Sandy said. "You're to go easy on solid foods for a while. Doctor's orders. Besides, I already had these defrosting." Dom rolled his eyes. "Well, it serves you right for wolfing down sausages." Charlie looked up at his father with distress on his face. "Just an expression, darling," smiled Sandy. Though Jake would have been perfectly happy to continue playing make-believe rock star in the empty hall after class, Wednesday saw him with an actual audience. Rory, having left Leona to her current project in the art block, was passing by the hall on his way out of the building when he felt a cacophony rattling the walls. Recognizing a good percussionist when he heard one, he pushed open the doors to find a drummer significantly younger than he had expected, 3 school years being a lifetime in teenage terms. As yet unaware he was being watched, Jake continued pounding along to the song in his earphones while Rory patted his thigh to the beat and slowly drifted towards the stage. The older boy's unexpected presence startled Jake, who immediately ripped out his earphones and eyed Rory with some suspicion. "Sounds great," Rory said innocently. His voice echoed around the empty hall. "How long you been playing?" "Few months," responded Jake, trying his hardest to feign cool indifference. "Not bad," Rory nodded. An awkward silence fell between them. "I've seen you play guitar," muttered Jake eventually. "With your band." "Oh, that's right," Rory said, pointing a finger. "I remember. You were with your little brother." "Charlie." "Yeah, Charlie, that's it. He was hitting on my girlfriend." Rory gave an amused grin, but Jake only felt a sting of jealousy. "And you're Jake?" Jake nodded. "How's your dad doing? I heard what happened to him at the barbecue." "He's okay. Not allowed to talk for a while." "Right," smiled Rory. "Well, anyway, nice to properly meet you. I'm Rory." "I know," Jake said. Jake's rather intense stare discomforted Rory, who shuffled his feet, then glanced at his watch. "Well, didn't mean to interrupt. Keep up the good work." As he started to leave, Jake dug the tips of his drumsticks into his palm, acutely aware that a golden opportunity was slipping away. He called, with no real idea what to say next. Rory stopped and turned back. Jake cleared his throat. "Maybe you need a drummer?" Rory let out a little laugh until he realized the suggestion had been serious. Sorry man, we already have a drummer." "Right," said Jake. Then, giving his best whatever shrug, he put his earphones back in and queued up the next song. Before Rory could speak again, Jake was already thumping out another beat, evidently intent on showing the drum kit how little he cared. Rory tilted his head and watched him for a moment longer before heading out the door. The next afternoon, during his practice, Jake found he again had an audience, only this time it was 3. Rory, who had spent his entire lunch break raving to Alex and Enrico about this younger kid who could really play the drums, had decided to bring his bandmates along to judge for themselves. Jake thrashed away to his music, fully aware of 3/4 of Discount Sushi assessing him from the back of the hall, with a vigour and attitude designed to win them over. To his delight, it appeared to be working. He's good, mouthed Alex towards Rory, bobbing his head in time to the pulse of the kick drum. True, Rory nodded, lost in thought. Yeah, he is. When the end of the song came, the three older boys broke into applause. Alex let out a shrill whistle through his fingers, while Jake flicked the hair out of his face to reveal an embarrassed smile. Just stopped by for another look, Rory shouted from the back of the hall. Hope we're not bothering you. It's cool, said Jake, all of a sudden feeling 10 feet tall. He adjusted a cymbal. When he looked up, the other boys were whispering amongst themselves. How about this? Rory yelled after a moment. Come back tomorrow and we'll have our instruments too. We can run through a couple of songs or something, see how it sounds. Would you be up for that? Jake was dumbstruck. He nodded in agreement, but not before telling himself to wipe the goofy grin off his face. Sure. I mean, that'd be... yeah. Okay, great. Nothing too serious. It's just, you can really play. Jake nodded again and watched them leave. After a few seconds, to make sure they were definitely not around to see it, he allowed himself to punch a celebratory fist in the air. The youngster got barely a minute of sleep that night, so jazzed up was he about the prospect of joining a real-life band, and he couldn't keep from yawning his way through almost the entirety of the next day's lessons. At one point, he shook himself awake to find his history teacher, Mr. Mansfield, leaning over his desk, with several students giggling in the background. If you've quite finished dozing, Mr. Mansfield berated, then we'll continue. Jake hid behind his hair and sank down in his chair. Sorry. Once Jake's last class was finally over, he hurried over to the hall to find Rory, Alex, and Enrico already on the stage, unclipping their guitar cases and pulling out leads and pedals. Jake took a deep breath and walked towards them, clasping the straps of his backpack. Hey, there he is, called Rory amenably. How's it going? Not bad, thanks. How are you? Jake replied, his voice squeaking. He took his position on the drum stool and pulled out his sticks. When he looked up, he realized that Leona was sitting in the front row, smiling at him. He attempted a stick twirl, but the drumstick fumbled out of his stubby fingers and clattered to the floor. Leona laughed and returned her attention to her sketchpad. Yeah, all good, Rory was saying. So, I've been working on a new song. I'll start it off and you just join in whenever. He then proceeded to launch into the guitar lick he had been working on during the barbecue. Enrico and Alex watched his hands for a moment, played one or two notes of their own to find the key, then before long were building their own parts around him on the fly. Jake felt a surge of panic. He started to tap his foot against the hi-hat pedal to try and latch on to the rhythm. But, worrying that his lack of playing was stretching out for far too long, he hit an out-of-time crash followed by an uncertain beat that quickly caused Rory to stumble over his guitar line. Sorry, Jake hollered, coming to a stop. Alex and Enrico exchanged a glance while Leona looked up from her sketchpad. Can I try that again? All good, smiled Rory. We're just jamming. Let it flow. Jake's second attempt to join in was, thankfully, somewhat more successful. Biting his tongue in concentration, he maintained a simpler 4/4 groove and even managed to follow Rory through one or two transitions. The jam lasted a couple of minutes before eventually falling apart again. Sorry, blushed Jake. I'll get it. No worries, man. Honestly, that was sounding great. You've got a knack. Really? For sure, just have fun. The exact same way as when you're playing to your earphones. If you get lost, just drop out and join back in again. And so they went again. Now, with Alex and Enrico grooving, Leona nodding along from the front row, and Rory urging him on over his guitar, Jake could feel his confidence growing in spades. He attempted one or two more adventurous fills, and even managed to elicit a smile out of Rory as he played. Meanwhile, there was a buzz over in the offices of Guildwood and Hart Real Estate as the staff filed into Conference Room A. Standing at the head of the enormous mahogany meeting table in his baby blue dress shirt and sparkling cufflinks, the rotund Mr. Munro nodded for silence. "All right, my little worker bees," he began as the murmurs quietened. "You all know why we're here. The excitement is positively palpable.
And I know all of you are gunning to get down to the pub just as much as I am, so let us tarry no further. It's time to announce the Guildwood and Hart Agent of the Year.
Lorraine sat poised at the exact opposite end of the table, in the seat she had occupied upon receiving each of the last 4 years' prizes. She was not superstitious by any means. To her, this was more a matter of course, of professional consistency. She smiled patiently as Mr. Munro gave a brief summary of the performance and successes from the year. But when he read out Tony Harlan's name instead of hers, Lorraine found herself wondering if her usual chair must have been somehow switched. Tony gave a warm, modest, though clearly rehearsed, acceptance speech to the room, took his applause, and as everyone was rising from their seats to scope out a good spot at the Eagle for some champagne, wandered over to offer Lorraine a word or two of consolation. But his attempt at levity, suggesting that her career must surely be in decline now, was not met with the sunniest of reactions. Lorraine did her best to remain gracious and even managed to give him a congratulatory handshake, but she exhaled with relief the second Tony went to collect his praise from some other colleagues loitering just outside the door. She barely had a second to compose herself before Mr. Munro sidled up to her.
"Lorraine, hard luck," he said.
She noticed for the first time that the strands of hair he insisted on combing to the side did very little to hide his male pattern baldness.
"Maybe next year. I know you've been putting all your efforts into the old Hannibal house, leaving good old Tony to ever so quietly sneak up behind you. Just the way it goes, I'm afraid. Oh, while we're on the subject, there's been a bit of movement on that front."
This instantly caught Lorraine's attention. Movement?
"That's right. Some relatives of the Hannibals seem to have materialized, from God knows where, I don't know. Hold on, I have it here. The Cottles, that's right. Nice young couple, by all accounts, if a little oddball."
He wagged a finger near his temple.
"Mind you, you'd have to be to take that place if you ask me. Anyway, as of today, it is no longer your project. Good news, eh? Jolly decent effort from yourself, Lorraine. It was always going to be a difficult sell. On the bright side, out of the woods."
Mr. Munro gave Lorraine a slightly jarring whack on the shoulder, then excused himself to follow the troops to the pub. When she blinked herself back to reality, she realised she was all alone in the conference room. Before long, the entire building was empty, save for Lorraine sitting in the dark with her head in her hands. Jake, Rory, Alex and Enrico were cruising through another rendition of the song when out of nowhere the 3 older boys stopped. Jake continued thrashing along behind his wall of sound for a few more seconds before realising he was the only one still playing. He turned to where everyone was looking and saw the lanky frame and long red hair of Peter Lapp standing at the back of the hall.
"What are you guys doing?"
called Peter.
We were just..."
Rory glanced at the others. Enrico was now absorbed in tuning his guitar while Alex inspected his bass amp's dials. Jake sat motionless on the drum stool and tried to be as invisible as possible.
"You guys are playing without me?"
Rory lifted his guitar strap over his head and jumped down from the stage.
"No, not exactly. I mean, yes, but we were just trying something." "Are you serious? I'm away for a couple of weeks and you just get someone new? Am I that replaceable?" "No, it's not like that."
Rory had, by now, started to hurry up the aisle towards Peter, but stopped when it became evident Peter wasn't similarly moving to meet him. He now stood uncertainly in the middle of the hall. Leona, her feet up on the chair, buried her face in her knees.
"I just walked in on him, Jake, playing the other day, and we thought he sounded really good, and so I wanted to..."
"He's only like 12. I didn't think I was that bad."
"Hey!"
shouted Jake. He lost his nerve upon assessing how much larger Peter was than him. Quietly he added,
"I'm 15.
"Whatever," Peter yelled, returning his focus to Rory. "See how much I really care. I was only doing it because of you guys anyway." Rory raised an eyebrow.
"What does that mean?"
Peter sighed. "It means I don't need to deal with this." He turned and stormed out of the door.
"Wait!"
blurted out Rory, but his call echoed and died against the high walls of the hall. The weather's week-long indecision between scorching sunshine and heavy downpours had resulted in something of a muggy paradise for all the airborne insects, such that Adrian's new bug zapper appeared to be sparking and crackling on a near-constant basis. This tiny sound and light show was precisely what compelled Ruby and Daisy Herschey towards Adrian's fence in the first place. The girls peered into the garden through the ajar gate, one head on top of the other, then crept towards the zapper dangling over the grill. They watched with wide-eyed glee as the tiny bugs exploded above them. Since it was now Daisy's turn to issue a dare in their long-running game, she dared Ruby to climb up onto the barbecue with her back to the zapper, close her eyes, and hold her mouth open. "Be the bug zapper!" she yelled. Ruby climbed onto the metal lid of the grill and unsteadily rose to her feet, her trainers leaving a muddy sludge all over it. She then assumed the position from Daisy's challenge. A moment later, she dropped her shoulders and peeked through one eye. "How long do I have to do this?" "Until a bug goes in," her sister shouted back up to her. Ruby hesitated and frowned, before shrugging and once again tipping her head back with open mouth. Daisy, to help, began rushing around the garden, waving her arms to try and herd any nearby insects towards her sister. Ruby started to giggle. But as she laughed to herself, the purple bobble on top of her hat brushed against the electrified metal grid behind her. Some woolen strands were zapped, and the fluffy hat ignited. It was in that precise moment that Marigold Weatherby happened to be passing by with Maria Callas, humming old operas as she dipped out for a cheeky afternoon scone. Armed with an ornate paper fan to keep the muggy, insect-filled air at bay, she glanced over the fence at the sound of mischievous giggling and immediately saw the flame on Ruby's head. "Fire!" she shrieked, bursting through the gate and hurtling towards the girl on top of the barbecue with such speed that Maria Callas was swept clean off her shoulder. The octogenarian reached up both arms and grabbed Ruby off the grill, then ripped the flaming bobble hat from her head and threw it on the ground. Finding her furious flapping fan and full-lunged puffs were achieving nothing, she began simply digging her heel against the flaming hat until the fire was out. Ruby, meanwhile, lay on the muddy grass and stared open-mouthed at Marigold, looking quite pale. With the fire seen to, Marigold hurried over to the trembling girl. She could see her hair was quite badly singed around the crown of her head. She threw her arms around her. Daisy tiptoed over. "Is she all right?" Marigold didn't answer. She just looked at Daisy, then pulled her into the big cuddle she was already giving her twin sister. When Lorraine arrived home several hours later, she found it ominously quiet. No sooner had she closed the front door than the silhouette of someone appeared through the glass, repeatedly ringing her doorbell. "We need to talk," said Marigold, barging past with such intent that Lorraine was too surprised to stop her. When she turned around to face her, Lorraine could see an unmistakable fire in the older woman's eyes. "Your girls are at my house," she said. "They're safe. They've got sandwiches and hot milk, and Lars is keeping an eye on them for the moment." "What is this?" Lorraine began. She was abruptly halted by Marigold's raised hand. "I'm speaking," Marigold chided. "I spotted your girls playing in one of the neighbours' gardens this afternoon. They got too close to the bug zapper and poor Ruby's hat caught fire. I got her away and put it out, but—" She paused. Lorraine thought for a moment she was fighting back a tear. "They could have been terrifically harmed if it wasn't for the simple stroke of good fortune of my walking by. So something needs to change here. Your responsibility is to your daughters first and foremost, and if you continue to let them act out and not protect them when they need it, then, well, I don't know what more I can say to you." Marigold rose to her feet and started to walk out. But just before she reached the door, she turned once more to Lorraine. "When you look at those girls, what do you feel in your heart? I advise you to think long and hard about it, about what your priorities are. I lost my only son far, far too young, and I've tried to heal from that pain my whole life. I had my career, my success. I sung on stages around the world and have, by some miracle, lived long enough to see my legacy cemented. But I would trade everything that has come in my life since losing him, all of it, for one more day with my boy." She let herself out of the Hershey's house and left Lorraine standing there in droop-shouldered silence. On any other day, Lorraine might have directed her energy outwards, yelled at Adrian and Helena for leaving their bug zapper on, attempted to sue the manufacturers of it, perhaps. but that no longer made any sense to Lorraine. She remembered how hard she had worked to bring the girls into her life. She had seen doctors and specialists and paid good money for treatments and the best nanny she could find, but in the end she had opted for the familiar comfort of non-stop work. That used to be an oasis, but even that wasn't true anymore. It was another minute or two before Marigold accompanied Daisy and Ruby home. She scowled once more at Lorraine and then left them alone. Ruby's hair still smelt faintly of burning, and her purple hat was long gone, half charred and caked in dirt from Marigold's shoe and now in her kitchen rubbish bin. The girls met uncertain eyes with their mother, expecting to get the scolding of a lifetime. But she was not displaying the same wordless intensity they had grown to know so well. Instead, her eyes were moist. "Girls," she said quietly, "go upstairs." They did as they were told. Lorraine picked up the little prince and followed them up to their room. You have been listening to the By Torchlight podcast. For more, visit patreon.com/bytorchlight or search By Torchlight on Spotify and YouTube.